the things I want to talk about tonight is that I really do think this same principle cuts both ways. You know, and it's true in life, right? You confront the consequences on like the bathroom scale if you've been eating ice cream all summer, like I have, and you know, if you've stopped working out, right? You confront the consequences in a negative way when that happens. But you also confront the consequences on that same bathroom scale. You know, you confront the consequences happily when you start eating better and when you start exercising more, right? The bill comes due both ways. The bill comes due for constructive decisions, just as it comes due for destructive decisions. And so take, for example, something that we have been covering here on this show for a long time. You know, we've covered the administration's efforts to build huge Trump prison camps to hold people without trial. Those warehouse prison conversions they wanted to build all over the country, which would be some of the biggest prison camps on earth. And as we have covered here on this show, they have largely had to pull back from that plan because of the huge public pushback they got against those prison camps. Not a single one of those Trump prison camp warehouse conversions has been able to open. It's possible none of them ever will. That said, even without being able to build the huge new camps, they have been locking people up in immigrant prisons that generally have terrible conditions. We have covered efforts, for example, to try to get the Trump immigrant prison at Delaney Hall in New Jersey shut down. We have covered the efforts to get the Trump immigrant prison for kids and families in Dilley, Texas, shut down. We are now watching local residents in Aurora, Colorado, pushing there. There has been reportedly been tuberculosis inside the Trump immigrant prison in Aurora, Colorado. An off-duty prison employee just shot somebody outside that prison within the past week. We've been watching local residents in Aurora try to get the Colorado State Health Department to intervene at that Trump immigrant prison in Aurora to investigate the health care and conditions there. We will continue to cover that story as it evolves. In New England this past week, people walked 80 miles from the tip of Cape Cod to the Plymouth County Jail to protest the circumstances in which they are jailing immigrants at the Plymouth County Jail. This weekend, there were protests against ICE and Trump's immigrant prisons in Charlotte, North Carolina, where they mourned people who have been killed by ICE, but where they are also trying to stop Trump from reopening a former prison in Winton, North Carolina, to use it to hold immigrants. There were protests this weekend against ICE and ICE agents killing people in Pasadena and in downtown L.A. in Southern California. In downtown L.A., they carried coffins representing people killed by ICE agents. In Houston, Texas, where a father of 3 was killed just a couple of weeks ago, people marched and protested all last weekend into this weekend. There were anti-ICE protests in Boston, in West Monroe, Louisiana, in Mount Kisco, New York, in Newton and North Plainfield, New Jersey. In Twin Falls, Idaho this weekend, people protested against their local airport being used for ICE flights, as that agency uses charter aircraft to shuttle immigrants from prison to prison all over the country. Twin Falls, Idaho, out this weekend saying not here, do not use our community, do not use our airport for this. So we've covered all of that here on this show, but you might also remember that in an ongoing way for several months now, we've also had eyes on Citizens Bank. Citizens Bank is in the Northeast. It's based in Providence, Rhode Island. And in January this year, the day actually that Alex Preddy was killed by ICE agents, or by federal agents in Minneapolis, we watched as these scrappy little groups of protesters in cities all over the Northeast started focusing in on Citizens Bank, specifically because Citizens finances the companies that run Trump's immigrant prisons. And we saw these sort of scrappy groups, large and small, demonstrating in the frigid cold in January, that terrible last weekend in January when Minneapolis just exploded in anger and grief. If you looked elsewhere in the country, one of the things we saw was that there were something like 40 different demonstrations in 7 different states, all targeting Citizens Bank, saying they wanted to de-ICE Citizens Bank. And then the following week, there were a few more. And then in March, there was another bigger round of protests at Citizen Bank branches. And there were increasingly widespread reports of individual bank customers, just regular people, pulling their money out of the bank and closing their accounts, moving their bank accounts elsewhere because of Citizens funding Trump's immigrant prisons. Then in April, the group organizing these protests, the de-ICE group, they warned Citizens Bank ahead of time that there were going to be a lot of protesters at their annual shareholders meeting in Rhode Island. Protesters pressing them on this very issue. And at that shareholders meeting, indeed, there were a lot of protesters there at the site of the meeting, and there were dozens of protests at Citizens Bank all over the Northeast at the same time. And then we learned that not just individual depositors, not just individual customers were pulling their money out of Citizens Bank, but institutions were starting to do so too. A labor union in Rhode Island pulled its money out of Citizens Bank because of the bank's support for Trump's immigrant prisons. Then a faith group did the same. The Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, which had a lot of money deposited at Citizens Bank, they said they were willing to pull it, but they wanted to talk. They wanted to talk to the bank. This is a group of clergy and congregations. They wanted to discuss this area of concern with the bank, and at first they thought they were going to get that. But then in May, when they said the CEO of the bank reneged on a pledge to meet with them, the interfaith group from Boston followed through. They pulled $1 million out of Citizens Bank. It was around then that we saw this billboard go up near Citizens Bank headquarters. Hey, Citizens Bank, support communities, not ICE prison companies. De-ICE Citizens Bank. Then the protests started getting big. We saw more than 100 simultaneous protests at Citizens Bank branches in June. Then we saw that interfaith group in Boston follow through on their pledge to keep pulling out more money as long as the bank didn't change its ways or at least agree to talk to them. They pulled out another $2 million out of Citizens Bank. Then people started to organize to get their own towns to pull their money out of Citizens Bank. City and town accounts. Jersey City, New Jersey, residents there got their city to pull $150 million out of Citizens Bank. In Cleveland, Ohio, the Greater Cleveland Congregations, another faith group, pulled their money out of Citizens too. Then this month, mid-July, we saw Montclair, New Jersey, pulled out their town's money too. And all this time, Citizens Bank had been saying, no, 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 we can't hear you, we don't care, we're not changing anything, we're not even responding to you. No, 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 for all of these months that all of those protests and all of those actions were happening. No, 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 we're not changing anything. Until finally they did. Citizens Bank has now announced that they have, quote, determined that it is now appropriate to exit the credit facilities for these clients. The bank characterized this as a business decision, definitely nothing to do with the pressure they've faced, definitely nothing to do with any, oogie feelings that might have arisen when looking at themselves in the mirror in the morning. I should mention Cheltenham Township in Pennsylvania announced that they're still pulling their money out of Citizens despite the announcement from the bank. The Greater Boston Interfaith Organization and the de-ICE Citizens Bank Coalition, they're still asking Citizens Bank to confirm that they're definitely done funding this stuff and that they won't do it again in the future. But Citizens has changed course. And I think it is worth seeing that this is also a bill coming due, right? For the hard work and risk and discomfort and bravery and stick-to-itiveness it takes to turn your country around, sometimes those bills come due too. I mean, did you ever go to one of those Tesla takedown protests at a Tesla dealership while Doge was destroying the Forest Service? Do you remember thinking at the time, I don't know if this will do anything, but I got to try something? Well, those Tesla takedown protests ultimately were a big part of pushing the president's top campaign donor out of the government and ending his Doge thing before it could do even more damage. Did you ever go to an Avelo Airlines protest? Do you remember thinking at the time, I don't know if this will do anything, but I got to try something? Those Avelo Airlines protests pushed Avelo Airlines out of the business of flying chained and shackled immigrants for Trump. Did you go to one of the protests against the warehouse site huge Trump prison camps? Do you remember thinking at the time, I don't know if this will do anything, but I got to try something? Well, those protests made it so not a single one of those mega Trump prison camps has been able to open anywhere in the country. And did you go to a protest against Citizens Bank funding Trump's immigrant prisons? Maybe you remember thinking at the time, I don't know if this will do anything, but I got to try something. Well, now Citizens Bank says it is out of the business of funding Trump's immigrant prisons. And no, they do not credit you at all for their decision. but it is what it is. The bill comes due. It comes due for our worst decisions and for our best decisions. Our actions have consequences. And that includes when you work hard and you organize and you decide to just never give up. And then the day does come when you win. Sometimes you win. Joining us now is the Reverend John Edgerton. He is the senior minister of Old South Church in Boston. His congregation is part of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. Reverend Edgerton, I told you a few months ago I'd love to have you back to talk about this effort that you and your church were part of. Couldn't be happier to have you back here tonight in these circumstances. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me back and for the opportunity to speak to your audience again.
Do you consider this to be a victory? I know from following your work from afar that you expect there's more work perhaps to be done here, but do you consider this to be a win?
Absolutely. This is such an important victory. It is a sign that any business, any part of this government that is participating in, that is going along with these terrible actions that are demonizing and harming our neighbors, that they are going to be in a lousy position. Citizens Bank had to give in because they were in an impossible position. There were municipal governments that were pulling their deposits. There were individual depositors who are doing that, whole organizations, hundreds of millions of dollars. The pressure got to be so great that they had no choice but to cut this. And on the other side is the pressure that perhaps there will be retribution from this administration against them. If there is a business leader who's listening who is considering whether they want to get into business, this dirty business, do not. You will be between a rock and a hard place of an administration that is out of control on the one hand and a country that does not want this at all.
I was struck when I spoke with you before, early in this campaign, that you wanted to talk to the bank, that yes, you wanted them to change course, but you weren't issuing a demand and saying, take it or leave it, we're going to do this unless you meet our imperative. You said that you wanted to have a conversation, and then you only first pulled your deposits after you weren't able to get that meeting that you wanted. I just wanted to ask, have you heard anything from the bank, from citizens, since they announced they're severing their ties with these private prison companies?
We have not. We have reached out very regularly since our first communications with them, and we would value the opportunity to sit down with them. What we have for them is actually some good advice about what it is going to take for them to be able to rebuild trust in the community. You said yourself that there are towns that are just going to go ahead and pull their money out anyway. This is not something that they're simply done with this. They need to repair the harm that they have done. And we, in the faith community, we don't have any monopoly on learning how to repair and get back onto a right road, but we can give them some good advice about what it's going to take for them to prove to the people of this country that they really do have the interests of ordinary people, of immigrants, of our neighbors in mind. And we would love to sit down with them and help them understand what it's going to take to rebuild that trust.
Reverend John Edgerton, Senior Minister of Old South Church in Boston, part of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. Thank you so much for your time tonight, for keeping us apprised throughout this remarkable campaign. Good luck to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, much more ahead here tonight. Stay with us.